The desert at night is not silent, though at first it feels that way. If you stand on the Giza plateau after the sun has fallen, you notice the stillness before anything else. The heat lingers in the stones, the wind slips across the sand, and the sky above opens like a vast black sea filled with stars. Then, slowly, your senses begin to catch what hides in the quiet. The faint whistle of the breeze along the plateau, the shift of sand against stone, the distant bark of a stray dog echoing from the villages beyond the ancient necropolis. It is in this half-silence, this dreamlike setting, that the pyramids rise. Their outlines stand against the night like mountain peaks sculpted by human will. Even without sunlight, their geometry is unmistakable. Triangles stretching toward the heavens, sharp edges carved against the endless dark. No matter how often they have been photographed, described, or imagined, the first sight of them in person still unsettles the mind. They seem too large, too precise, too enduring. 4,500 years, or perhaps longer, they have been here, looking out across the Nile Valley, long after their builders vanished. For humanity, the pyramids are more than monuments. They are symbols. They represent permanence in a world that rarely allows it. They represent ambition on a scale that borders on the impossible. They represent mystery, the certainty that even with centuries of study, we do not fully understand them. In every century since their construction, people have looked at these structures and felt the same mix of awe and confusion. We usually tell ourselves a simple story about them. The pyramids were tombs built for kings who called themselves gods. They were raised during Egypt's Old Kingdom by armies of workers, organized with precision, overseen by priests and engineers, their purpose to guarantee eternal life for the pharaoh and cosmic order for the nation. It is a tale of ingenuity, of human determination, of a civilization at its peak. It comforts us because it feels complete, but in the quiet of the desert, doubts stir. What if that story is not the whole truth? What if the Egyptians themselves did not build the pyramids? What if these shapes, so familiar, belong not to the world we think we know, but to another story, one erased by time? This question matters because it reaches beyond stone. If the pyramids are not what we believe them to be, then the way we imagine civilization itself begins to shift. Our timeline of progress, the story of how humans learned, discovered, and built, would no longer be straight and clear. Instead, it would be broken, interrupted, filled with forgotten chapters. The pyramids would not be the culmination of Egyptian ingenuity, but the survivors of something older, stranger, perhaps more advanced than we are willing to admit. Before exploring that possibility, it helps to picture what these structures truly are. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest of them all, once stood 146 meters tall, nearly the height of a modern skyscraper of 50 stories. Its base spans more than 230 meters on each side, covering an area large enough to hold 10 football fields. It was built with over 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. To imagine its mass, consider this. The Great Pyramid weighs an estimated 6 million tons in total, more than every cathedral in Europe combined, and yet its sides are aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, off by less than a fraction of a degree. Beside it stands the Pyramid of Khafra, slightly smaller though still immense, and the Pyramid of Menkaure, more modest but equally precise. Together they form the heart of the Giza Plateau, their arrangement said to mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. To the east lies the Great Sphinx, carved directly from the bedrock, its lion's body and human face gazing eternally toward the rising sun. These monuments define Egypt. They appear on its coins, its flags, its tourist posters. They anchor the identity of a nation and, more than that, the imagination of the world. From the time of Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, people have speculated about how these structures came to be. Herodotus wrote that 100,000 workers labored for 20 years under the command of Khufu. Later writers imagined slaves dragging stones through the desert, whipped by overseers. In modern times, archaeologists corrected that image. discovering the remains of workers' villages near the plateau, evidence that those who built the pyramids were not slaves, but organized laborers, housed and fed by the state, perhaps even honored for their role in this monumental task. It is a compelling story. Tens of thousands of farmers, freed from their fields during the annual flood of the Nile, employed in service of their king. They carved limestone blocks from nearby quarries, hauled granite from Aswan hundreds of kilometers to the south, and placed each stone with methodical precision. Guided by a vision of eternity, their reward was not only food and shelter, but the knowledge that they were participating in something larger than themselves, the guarantee of cosmic order, the eternal survival of their ruler, and through him, the survival of Egypt itself. Yet even in this official narrative, shadows remain. Why does the Great Pyramid contain no carved inscriptions declaring Khufu's triumph, no texts detailing its purpose, no murals praising the gods? Why do later pyramids, built only decades afterward, appear less perfect, some collapsing, some crude, when the supposed mastery of pyramid building should have been at its peak? Why do the dimensions of the Great Pyramid appear to encode mathematical and astronomical constants far beyond what we think the Egyptians knew? These questions whisper at the edges of the story. Most scholars explain them away. They argue that the absence of inscriptions is coincidence, that the mathematical alignments are either errors of measurement or the product of later interpretation, that the decline of later pyramids was due to economic strain rather than lost knowledge. But the questions remain, persistent and unsettling. And so, in the stillness of the desert night, a thought arises. What if we have misunderstood? What if the pyramids are not simply the product of Egypt's old kingdom, but something older, something inherited, something deliberately concealed? To ask this is not to deny the brilliance of ancient Egypt. The civilization of the Nile was extraordinary in countless ways. Its art, its writing, its religious imagination, its ability to organize and endure across millennia, all of these shaped the world. But perhaps the pyramids, these towering forms, were not the beginning of Egypt's greatness. Perhaps they were the inheritance that made such greatness possible. The possibility unsettles us because it asks us to reimagine time itself. We like to think of human history as a staircase. Step by step, we ascend. First small villages, then cities, then kingdoms, then empires, each stage building on the last. But what if history is not a staircase? What if it is a cycle, rising and falling, civilizations appearing and vanishing, knowledge gained and lost, leaving only fragments behind? The pyramids, if not built by the Egyptians, would be such fragments, evidence of a chapter we have forgotten. Imagine for a moment the Sahara not as desert, but as savanna. Picture grasslands stretching where now only sand lies, rivers flowing, lakes shining under the sun, herds of cattle and antelope roaming across what we now call wasteland. Between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, this was reality. The African humid period turned the Sahara into a cradle of life. People lived there, painted its rocks with images of animals and boats, created cultures we can scarcely imagine. When the climate shifted, the rains disappeared, the desert spread, and those cultures vanished, migrating toward the Nile, toward survival. Could the pyramids be the last inheritance of that world? Could they have been built not by Khufu, but by people whose names are lost, people who carried their knowledge into stone before the desert consumed their memory? If so, then the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom may not have been the architects of the pyramids, but their curators, the inheritors of monuments already ancient when the first pharaohs ruled. This is speculation, of course. Mainstream archaeology holds firmly to its timeline, but speculation is not fantasy when the stones themselves raise the questions. The absence of inscriptions, the unmatched precision, the erosion on the Sphinx that suggests rainfall in an age when Egypt was not yet desert. All of these hint at another story beneath the sand. What makes this question so powerful is not only what it says about Egypt, but what it says about us. If the pyramids are older than we think, if they are the work of forgotten builders, then humanity's story is not linear but fragile. Knowledge can vanish. Civilizations can disappear. Our ancestors may have achieved wonders we no longer remember, leaving us to rediscover what they once knew. And so the pyramids stand not only as monuments of stone, but as mirrors. They reflect our need for certainty, our hunger for meaning, our fear of forgetting. They remind us that history is not fixed, but shifting, shaped as much by silence as by words. They invite us to listen, to the desert wind, to the silence of the chambers, to the questions that rise when we let the familiar story slip away. The Giza Plateau at night is a place of shadows and geometry, of stars and silence. The pyramids stand there, unmoved, unchanging, their stones glowing faintly in the starlight. They do not answer, they never have, but they ask, and the question they ask has no easy reply. What if the Egyptians did not build the pyramids? When archaeologists describe the pyramids, they begin with a timeline. According to the accepted history of ancient Egypt, the pyramids of Giza were built during a period we call the Old Kingdom. This was the first great flowering of Egyptian civilization, a time when kings became pharaohs and ruled with divine authority, when art, religion, and state power came together to form a society that still fascinates us today. The Old Kingdom spanned from around 2686 to 2181 BCE. It is remembered above all for its monuments. Stone replaced mud brick, scale replaced modesty, and ambition reached beyond the horizon. At the heart of this era was the Fourth Dynasty, a sequence of rulers who transformed the Egyptian landscape forever. The dynasty began with Sneferu, a king whose experiments in stone set the stage for what would follow. He built not one but 3 pyramids, testing angles, correcting mistakes, learning through failure and success. His bent pyramid, so named because its slope changes halfway up, is thought to reveal a miscalculation corrected mid-construction. His red pyramid, by contrast, achieved the classic triangular form that would become the model for all later pyramids. Sneferu's reign was long, prosperous, and ambitious, and it was his bloodline that would give Egypt its most enduring symbols. After Sneferu came Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops. He is remembered, sometimes admired, sometimes condemned, as the builder of the Great Pyramid. His son Khafre raised the second pyramid, slightly smaller but still monumental, and is often associated with the Great Sphinx. Khafre's successor, Menkaure, constructed the third and smallest of the Giza pyramids, completing the triad that dominates the plateau. In little more than a century, 3 kings reshaped the desert into a vision of eternity. This is the official story. According to it, the pyramids were royal tombs designed to secure the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife. For the Egyptians, death was not an end but a transformation. The body perished, but the Ka, the life force, endured. To sustain it, the king required offerings, rituals, and a physical vessel that would last forever. The pyramid was that vessel, a cosmic machine built of stone. Its sloping sides symbolized the rays of the sun, guiding the king's soul upward toward the heavens, where he would join Ra, the sun god, in eternal rebirth. To modern eyes, a pyramid looks like a solid block of stone, but inside, the Great Pyramid contains a network of passages and chambers. The king's chamber, with its granite sarcophagus, was thought to be the resting place of Khufu himself. The queen's chamber, lower in the structure, has puzzled archaeologists, its purpose debated. Narrow shafts extend from these chambers toward the stars, perhaps to allow the king's spirit to ascend. The design is simple in appearance, but layered in meaning, shaped by a vision of eternity that still defies comprehension. The construction of such monuments required an organization unlike anything the world had seen before. The traditional explanation describes an army of workers, tens of thousands, perhaps more, organized into teams, supplied with food and tools, living in temporary cities built beside the plateau. Archaeological excavations have uncovered the remains of such settlements: bakeries, breweries, dormitories, even medical facilities. These discoveries overturned the old image of slaves whipped under the desert sun. Instead, they suggest a workforce made up of ordinary Egyptians, especially farmers. When the Nile flooded each year, covering the fields with water and silt, agricultural labor paused. The state could then redirect manpower toward royal projects. In this way, pyramid building became not just an act of devotion, but a cycle woven into the rhythm of the river. As for the methods, textbooks describe ramps of packed earth and brick, rising alongside or encircling the pyramid. On these ramps, teams dragged blocks on sleds, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction. Copper chisels were used to cut softer limestone, while harder granite was shaped with pounding stones. Logs and ropes, sleds and levers, these were the tools of the builders. Primitive by modern standards, but effective when combined with vast manpower, careful planning, and relentless determination. Skeptics sometimes doubt whether such methods could truly account for the scale of the pyramids, but archaeologists argue that with enough workers, enough time, and enough organization, the impossible becomes possible. 20 years for the Great Pyramid, they say, a lifetime of labor, but within the reach of a society as centralized and disciplined as Egypt's. The role of religion cannot be overstated. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was not merely a king, but a god on earth. His fate after death was tied to the fate of the nation itself. If the king achieved eternal life, Egypt would prosper. If he failed, chaos might follow. Thus, pyramid building was not simply construction. It was cosmic maintenance, an act to uphold the balance of the universe, the principle the Egyptians called ma'at. Every worker hauling stone, every overseer measuring angles, every priest chanting prayers, contributed to this great act of order. It is worth pausing to imagine how this would have felt for those involved. For a farmer, leaving the fields when the floods arrived, traveling to Giza, joining a crew of workers, it was not just labor. It was participation in something eternal. The bread and beer they received, the camaraderie of shared work, the sense of being part of the king's destiny, these made the task meaningful. The pyramid was not only for the pharaoh, it was for the people too, a monument that promised security and order for all. Over time, this story became the bedrock of Egyptology. Generations of scholars pieced together evidence from ruins, texts, and inscriptions. They connected the pyramids to the royal names of the 4th dynasty. They reconstructed the logistics of quarrying, transport, and construction. They studied workers' villages, analyzed tool marks on stone, and compared designs across monuments. The conclusion seemed unshakable. The pyramids were the product of Egypt's Old Kingdom, built by Egyptians for Egyptians, in the service of their kings and gods. By the 19th and 20th centuries, this narrative had entered textbooks, museums, and classrooms around the world. It became the settled history of the pyramids. For most people, it still is. Ask a guide at Giza, and they will point to Khufu's cartouche, scrawled in red paint on a block hidden in the Great Pyramid, discovered in the 19th century. Ask an archaeologist, and they will describe the ramps, the copper chisels, the organized labor. Ask a historian, and they will connect the pyramids to the rise of centralized kingship, the growth of bureaucracy, the flowering of Old Kingdom art and culture. There is comfort in this version of events. It portrays the pyramids as human achievements, the pinnacle of early civilization. It offers explanations, however demanding, that remain within the bounds of what we understand: manpower, organization, belief. It allows us to see the pyramids as part of a story we recognize, the story of human ingenuity. And yet, even within this official story, mysteries linger. The efficiency of the ramps, the precision of the alignments, the lack of inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid. These are questions left unanswered, or answered with theories that remain debated. But within the settled history, they are treated as details, not doubts. For archaeology, the broader picture is enough. The pyramids belong to Egypt's Old Kingdom, and that is where the matter rests. Still, as night settles again on the plateau, the stones themselves seem to say little. They do not confirm or deny. They stand as they have for millennia, silent against the stars. The official story provides one way to understand them. It is careful, reasonable, grounded in evidence, but beyond its borders, other possibilities remain, waiting to be considered. The story of the pyramids, as archaeology tells it, has a satisfying symmetry. Kings ordered, workers built, and monuments rose. But when we step closer, into the chambers, onto the stones themselves, that story begins to fray. Subtle details disturb the neatness. The pyramids, like the desert around them, reveal fissures, lines where certainty breaks apart. One of the most unsettling details is silence, specifically the silence inside the Great Pyramid. Egyptian kings, without exception, marked their monuments with their names, their titles, their prayers. Temples were covered in hieroglyphs, carved deep into stone, filled with images of gods and pharaohs. Tombs were painted with vivid scenes of the afterlife, designed to guide the soul through eternity. Even modest chapels carried inscriptions. But the Great Pyramid of Khufu is different. Step into its inner passages and you find bare stone. No hieroglyphs, no murals, no inscriptions at all. This absence is difficult to explain. If Khufu truly built the pyramid as his tomb, why leave it unmarked? Pharaohs were not known for humility. Their monuments were proclamations of divine power. To find the largest pyramid of all without a single carved word feels like a contradiction. Some scholars argue that the pyramid was never meant to be decorated, that the grandeur of its scale was inscription enough. Others suggest that any decorations may have been lost, though no traces remain. A handful point to the graffiti marks discovered in hidden chambers above the king's chamber, written in red paint and containing Khufu's name. But these marks, found in the 19th century, are controversial. Some Egyptologists accept them as proof. Others whisper of the possibility of fraud, noting that they were uncovered by an explorer eager to confirm his theory, in an era when archaeology was as much ambition as science. Whatever the explanation, the silence endures. Walk the narrow ascending passage, feel the cool granite of the king's chamber, and you are met not with words, but with emptiness. It is as if the builders wanted to conceal their identity, or perhaps never felt the need to state it. In a culture obsessed with names and memory, that silence is louder than any inscription. Another detail deepens the unease: the perfection of Khufu's pyramid compared to those that followed. The Great Pyramid is aligned with true north, with extraordinary precision, deviating less than a fraction of a degree. Its sides are nearly equal in length, differing by mere centimeters across more than 200 meters. Its stones, especially in the lower courses, are fitted with such accuracy that even today, a blade of metal can barely slide between them. By contrast, the pyramids that came after are less refined. Khafra's pyramid, though still monumental, shows less perfect alignment. Menkaures, smaller and more modest, contains rougher work. Later dynasties attempted to imitate the form, but their pyramids collapsed, crumbled, or were never completed. Some are little more than mounds of rubble. If pyramid building was a skill perfected over time, why does the greatest achievement appear first, unmatched by anything after? One would expect the Great Pyramid to be the culmination of centuries of progress, not the starting point. Instead, it stands like a peak, sudden and solitary, followed by decline. To understand why this puzzles researchers, consider Sneferu, Khufu's father. Sneferu's reign was long and ambitious. He built at least 3 pyramids, each an experiment. The Meidum Pyramid collapsed during construction, leaving only a stepped core. The Bent Pyramid began at too steep an angle. Midway, the builders changed course, reducing the slope to prevent collapse. The result is a pyramid with a visible kink in its sides. Only with the Red Pyramid did Sneferu's architects achieve stability, creating the first true smooth-sided pyramid in history. Then comes Khufu, and suddenly the Great Pyramid appears not just stable, but executed with mathematical precision and architectural mastery that seems to leap ahead of what came before. Some Egyptologists explain this as the natural product of trial and error. Sneferu's experiments finally paid off, and Khufu reaped the reward. But others wonder why Khufu's successors, with the supposed knowledge in hand, did not maintain or surpass that perfection. Instead, the skill seems to fade, as though something essential was lost. If the pyramids were truly the culmination of Egyptian experimentation, one expects a gradual progression, clumsy beginnings, steady improvement, a pinnacle, and continued refinement. Instead, the record shows collapse, adjustment, sudden perfection, and then decline. The Great Pyramid stands as an anomaly, its precision unmatched, its silence unexplained. The unease grows stronger when we turn to the Sphinx, carved directly from the bedrock beside Khafre's pyramid. It is one of the most iconic monuments of Egypt. A lion's body, a human face, gazing eternally toward the rising sun. Tradition holds that Khafre commissioned it, shaping the guardian to stand watch over his tomb. But the stone tells a different story. In the early 1990s, geologist Robert Schoch examined the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. The trench carved around its body. What he saw troubled him. The walls were not marked by the sharp horizontal grooves typical of wind erosion in the desert. Instead, they showed deep vertical channels, rounded edges, patterns formed by sustained rainfall. To a geologist, the evidence was unmistakable. The Sphinx had been weathered by water, not wind. The problem is that Egypt has not seen such rainfall for thousands of years. The last time the Giza Plateau experienced a wet climate was during the African humid period, between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, when the Sahara was green with grasslands, rivers, and lakes. If the erosion is truly from rain, then the Sphinx must predate the Old Kingdom by millennia. That would mean it was already ancient when Khafre lived, inherited rather than built, its face perhaps recarved to resemble the king. Mainstream Egyptologists dispute this interpretation. They argue that the erosion can be explained by wind, salt crystallization, or other natural processes. They note that the temples beside the Sphinx, built with blocks cut from its enclosure, show little sign of water damage, suggesting they were erected later, when the climate was already dry. The debate remains unresolved, but the implications are stark. If the geologist is right, the Sphinx is thousands of years older than we think. That would place it in a time before Egypt as we know it. A relic of an unknown culture, erased by shifting sands. These cracks in the narrative, the silence inside the Great Pyramid, the unmatched perfection of Khufu's monument, the clumsy experiments before and the failures after, the weathering of the Sphinx do not destroy the official story, but they weaken its foundations. They remind us that archaeology, like all science, is built on fragments. We reconstruct the past from what survives, but the past itself is larger, more complex, often more surprising than the pieces we hold in our hands. For most scholars, the official timeline remains the best explanation. It is supported by inscriptions linking Khufu and Khafre to their monuments, by the evidence of workers' villages, by the logic of centralized state power. But for others, these cracks invite different questions. If the Great Pyramid's silence is deliberate, what was it hiding? If Khufu's pyramid is too perfect to explain by gradual progress, where did that knowledge come from? If the Sphinx shows signs of rainfall, who carved it, and what did they intend it to mean? The answers remain elusive, but the questions themselves are enough to disturb certainty. They open the possibility that history is not as settled as we imagine. Beneath the official story, beneath the desert sands, another narrative waits, one that whispers of forgotten times, lost knowledge, and civilizations erased by memory. When we think of the Sahara today, we picture an endless desert, waves of sand, dry heat, a sun that burns without mercy. It feels eternal, as though it has always been this way. But the Sahara has not always been a desert. Thousands of years ago, before the pyramids rose, this land was green. Lakes shimmered where dunes now lie. Rivers carved through valleys that are today parched and empty. Grass stretched across plains, and herds of cattle grazed beneath skies heavy with seasonal rains. This period is known to scientists as the African Humid Period. Between roughly 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, a shift in the Earth's orbit altered the monsoon cycle, bringing rainfall deep into North Africa. The Sahara, which had once been dry, blossomed into a savanna. It became a cradle of life, filled with plants, animals, and people. Evidence of that forgotten world remains. Across the desert, carved into rock shelters and cliffs, are images of what the Sahara once held. Hunters with bows and spears chasing antelope. women and children walking beside herds of cattle, boats gliding along wide rivers, giraffes, elephants, crocodiles, all animals that cannot survive in the desert today, painted and etched by hands that saw them alive. These images, known as Saharan rock art, tell a story of abundance. They reveal a land that could sustain thriving communities, not a wasteland, but a home. Archaeologists have found traces of settlements in these greener times: stone tools, hearths, pottery, and even evidence of early agriculture appear in places that are now barren. People lived in villages, herded animals, and fished in lakes that no longer exist. One of the most striking sites is Nabta Playa, in southern Egypt near the border with Sudan. Here, thousands of years before the pharaohs, people built stone circles and ceremonial structures. Some of these align with the solstices, suggesting an awareness of astronomy long before written history. The people of Nabta Playa herded cattle, stored water, and gathered in ritual. They were not nomads passing through. They were organized, intentional, and creative. When the rains began to fade around 6,000 years ago, the Sahara dried, lakes shrank, rivers vanished, and grasslands turned to sand. Communities could no longer survive in the desert interior. They moved toward the Nile Valley, one of the few places where water still flowed year after year. It was here, nourished by the river's annual flood, that Egyptian civilization would later rise. In a sense, the pharaohs inherited the legacy of those who lived in the Green Sahara. The people who had once built stone circles and painted giraffes on rock faces became the ancestors of the farmers who filled the Nile Delta, who would eventually build temples, tombs, and perhaps more. This backdrop raises a possibility. If cultures could build monuments like Nabta Playa thousands of years before Khufu, what else might they have built? Could the pyramids, or at least their inspiration, have roots in that earlier age? The idea may sound bold, but history has shown that great monuments sometimes come from times we least expect. Take Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Discovered in the 1990 AS, it consists of vast stone enclosures filled with carved pillars, some weighing as much as 20 tons. The pillars are arranged in circles, many decorated with images of animals, lions, birds, snakes. Archaeologists have dated the site to around 9,500 BCE, more than 11,000 years ago. That makes it thousands of years older than Stonehenge, older even than the first cities in Mesopotamia. What makes Göbekli Tepe so astonishing is that it was built before agriculture had fully taken hold. The people who raised those stones were hunter-gatherers, long before the invention of writing or the wheel. Yet they managed to quarry, transport, and erect megaliths in complex arrangements, guided by a shared vision of ritual and community. Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, also reveals early sophistication. By 8000 BCE, its people had constructed stone towers and walls, monumental architecture that predates organized states. In Anatolia, the settlement of Catalhoyuk flourished around 7000 BCE, with densely packed houses, wall paintings, and shrines, an urban experiment long before pharaohs ruled along the Nile. And off the coast of Japan, at Yonaguni, divers have found submerged terraces and platforms that some believe to be the remains of a prehistoric structure, drowned when sea levels rose after the last ice age. These examples show that human ambition and skill did not suddenly appear in the Age of Kings. Long before Egypt, people were building, carving, and aligning stones with purposes we still struggle to understand. They remind us that civilization is not a single straight line of progress, but a patchwork of experiments, rises, and collapses. Some chapters of that story remain visible, others are buried beneath sand or sea. Seen in this light, the pyramids may not be an isolated miracle. They may be part of a larger pattern, one in which humans repeatedly reached for the monumental, the eternal, even in times we call prehistoric. The Green Sahara gave birth to cultures that were organized, creative, and attentive to the skies. When those cultures migrated to the Nile, they brought with them traditions, skills, and perhaps stories of monuments built elsewhere. The Egyptians may have drawn upon this deep inheritance, shaping it into their own vision of eternity. There is another way to imagine this. Picture a group of people living by a lake in the Sahara 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. They herd cattle, fish in the water, gather around fires at night. They carve animals into the rocks, recording the world they see. Perhaps on occasion, they gather for rituals, aligning stones with the rising sun, marking the turning of the seasons. To them, the land is alive with meaning, each flood and drought part of a cycle they struggle to understand. When the rains begin to fail, they look to the stars for answers, watching as Orion and Sirius return each year as the moon waxes and wanes. Over generations, these observations become traditions, and when their descendants settle along the Nile, those traditions evolve into the cosmic religion of the Pharaohs. From this perspective, the pyramids are not the sudden invention of a single dynasty. They are the flowering of seeds planted long before, by people whose names we will never know. The desert may have erased their villages, their fields, their lakes, but traces of their imagination survive. The pharaohs, with their wealth and power, amplified those traces into monuments of stone. Of course, archaeology cannot prove this with certainty. The evidence is fragmentary: rock art, stone circles, scattered remains. But what it reveals is enough to challenge the idea that Egypt emerged in isolation, as if from nothing. Cultures rarely begin from scratch. They inherit, adapt, transform. Egypt was no exception. Its roots reach deeper than dynasties, deeper than the Nile, into the green Sahara where forgotten societies once thrived. The thought carries a quiet weight. If the pyramids are connected to that lost world, even indirectly, then they are not only Egyptian monuments. They are also the last echoes of an Africa that no longer exists, a reminder of a time when deserts were rivers, when grass covered the dunes, when human beings were already reaching toward the eternal. When most people look at the Great Pyramid, they see a mountain of stone. At first glance, it feels heavy, solid, overwhelming. But beneath its weight, there is a second language written in its shape, a language of numbers, proportions, and alignments. This is where the pyramid stops being just a monument and begins to feel like a message carved not in words, but in geometry. The sides of the Great Pyramid once rose at a precise angle of about 51.8 degrees. Its base measured roughly 230.4 meters on each side, forming an almost perfect square. Its original height, before erosion and the loss of its capstone, was 146.6 meters. These numbers may seem ordinary until we compare them to the constants of mathematics. Take the relationship between the pyramid's perimeter and its height. Multiply the height by 2 and form a circle with that radius. The circumference of that circle is almost exactly equal to the pyramid's base perimeter. In other words, the builders encoded the ratio of a circle to its diameter, the number we call pi, directly into the stone. Pi is one of the most important constants in mathematics. It describes the geometry of circles, the motion of waves, the patterns of the universe itself. It was not formally calculated until thousands of years after the pyramids were built. And yet, here it is, silently expressed in limestone blocks. Another constant hides in the pyramid's slope. Divide half the base by the height, and you approach the golden ratio, also known as phi, approximately 1.618. This number appears again and again in nature. The spirals of shells, the arrangement of leaves, the proportions of the human body. Artists and architects through history have used it to create harmony and balance. To find it in the Great Pyramid suggests deliberate design, a choice to embed beauty and universality into its very form. Skeptics sometimes argue that these numbers are coincidences, artifacts of measurement or chance. After all, when dealing with such large structures, ratios can appear close to mathematical constants without intent. But the precision is difficult to dismiss. The deviation between the pyramid's proportions and these constants is so small that it seems unlikely to be accidental. The builders may not have known pi or phi as we define them today, but they clearly understood relationships between circles, triangles, and proportions. Whether by experiment, intuition, or inherited knowledge, they encoded mathematics into stone. The pyramid does not only speak in numbers, it also aligns with the Earth itself. Each side of its base faces one of the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The accuracy of this alignment is astonishing. Modern surveys show that the deviation from true north is less than 1/20th of a degree. Even with today's instruments, such precision is difficult to achieve on a structure of this scale. To imagine ancient builders, armed with copper tools and simple sighting rods, achieving this accuracy strains belief. How could they have done it? Some suggest they used the stars. The Egyptians were skilled observers of the night sky. By marking the rising and setting points of certain stars, they could establish true north with remarkable accuracy. One theory is that they used the pair of stars Kochab and Mizar, which crossed the meridian at opposite points. Aligning the pyramid during their simultaneous transit would give a nearly perfect north-south axis. Whether this was the exact method or not, the result is clear. The pyramid is aligned more precisely than any other ancient structure on Earth. The celestial connections go deeper. The three pyramids of Giza are arranged in a pattern that many believe mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt. In Egyptian religion, Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife. The Nile flowing beside the plateau was seen as a reflection of the Milky Way. In this vision, the pyramids became a cosmic map, a union of earth and sky, stone and star. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend from the king's and queen's chambers toward the outside. For centuries, they were thought to be ventilation ducts. But their alignments suggest a different purpose. One points toward Orion's belt, another toward Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and sacred to the goddess Isis. Others align with circumpolar stars, those that never set, associated with eternity. If these shafts were symbolic, they may have been spiritual pathways, channels for the Pharaoh's soul to ascend to the heavens. If they were practical, they may have been designed with an even deeper astronomical intention. Either way, their precision is striking. Beyond alignments and ratios, the pyramid also seems to echo the scale of the Earth itself. Multiply its original height by 43,200, and the result is nearly equal to the polar radius of our planet. Multiply the perimeter of its base by the same number, and you approach the Earth's equatorial circumference. These are not rough similarities, they are accurate to within a small margin of error. The number 43,200 is not random. It is linked to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that completes a cycle every 25,920 years. Divide that cycle into smaller parts, and 43,200 appears as a scaling factor. If the pyramid's builders embedded this number, they demonstrated not only an awareness of Earth's dimensions, but also of cosmic cycles spanning tens of thousands of years. For a civilization without telescopes, satellites, or even advanced geometry, such knowledge seems impossible. Unless, of course, they inherited it from a source we have forgotten. What do we make of all this? Some scholars insist these patterns are coincidences. They argue that human beings are skilled at finding meaning in numbers, at seeing patterns even where none exist. The pyramids were built large, they say, and with large numbers. Correlations are inevitable. But the counter-argument is compelling. Why does the Great Pyramid stand alone in its perfection? Why do its proportions encode constants with such accuracy when other monuments do not? Why does its scale resonate with the Earth itself? The possibility arises that the pyramid was designed not merely as a tomb, but as a kind of message. Unlike papyrus, which crumbles, or carvings which erode, geometry endures. A circle will always have the same ratio to its diameter. The Earth will always turn on its axis. The golden ratio will always appear in shells and flowers. By embedding these into stone, the builders created a language that transcends culture and time. Imagine the mindset of someone planning such a structure. Perhaps they believed knowledge itself was sacred, something worth preserving for ages to come. If their civilization faced collapse, what better way to protect its wisdom than to lock it into stone? Not in words that might be forgotten, but in ratios and alignments that would outlast everything. In this view, the Great Pyramid becomes a time capsule, a vessel of information designed to speak across millennia. Time capsules today hold objects, photographs, coins, letters, meant to show future generations who we were. The pyramid's builders may have thought differently. For them, universal truths mattered more than personal records. Numbers, proportions, and celestial alignments were not inventions of a single culture. They were features of reality itself. By shaping stone into these forms, the builders ensured that their message would survive, waiting for someone to notice. This perspective changes how we see the pyramid. It is no longer just a tomb, nor only a monument to a king. It becomes a conversation between humanity and the cosmos, a declaration that knowledge can endure even when civilizations fall. Whether or not we accept this fully, the idea has power. It explains why the Great Pyramid continues to fascinate us, not only because of its size, but because it feels like it contains something more, something we are still trying to decode. If we walk again around its base, tracing the massive stones, we can feel that sense of design. The scale overwhelms, but the precision whispers. Every angle, every ratio, every alignment points beyond itself, suggesting that this was no ordinary construction. Even if we cannot know for certain what the builders intended, the geometry invites us to imagine that they sought eternity not only in stone, but in the language of the universe itself. If the Great Pyramid encodes numbers that speak of the earth, if the Sphinx carries marks of an older climate, if the perfection of Khufu's pyramid stands unmatched, then a larger question begins to take shape. Perhaps the pharaohs were not the inventors of these monuments, but their inheritors. Perhaps what we see on the Giza plateau is not the beginning of something, but the echo of something already old. When Egypt rose from the Nile, the idea of an earlier, forgotten civilization is not new. It has drifted through human imagination for centuries, surfacing in myths, stories, and philosophies across the world. Among the most famous of these is the tale told by the Greek philosopher Plato. Around 360 BCE, Plato wrote of a place he called Atlantis. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he described a great island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to Plato, Atlantis was a powerful and advanced society, rich in resources, skilled in navigation and architecture. But its pride grew too great, and in a single day and night of catastrophe, the island was swallowed by the sea. To Plato, Atlantis was more than a story. It was a warning, a moral parable about hubris and the fall of civilizations. Yet ever since he wrote those lines, people have wondered if his tale carried a grain of truth. Could he have been echoing an older memory passed down through generations of a society that really did vanish? Archaeologists often dismiss Atlantis as myth. They point out that no evidence has ever been found for a great island empire in the Atlantic. But the allure of the story lies not in geography, but in the possibility that memories of lost worlds can survive in oral tradition. Plato may not have invented Atlantis out of nothing. He may have drawn on fragments of stories carried across time. Stories of floods, of drowned lands, of civilizations erased by disaster. Such stories appear everywhere. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a flood that destroyed humanity, a tale older than the Bible's account of Noah. In India, ancient texts speak of Manu, who survived a great deluge with the help of a fish god. In Native American traditions, from the Hopi to the Ojibwe, floods appear as forces that cleanse the world. And in Egypt itself, the earliest myths recall times before the dynasties, ages when gods ruled the land and cycles of creation and destruction shaped history. What unites these stories is not their details, but their persistence. For thousands of years, people have remembered catastrophes. They have remembered civilizations that rose and fell. They have remembered waters that came suddenly, wiping away cities and fields. Science now tells us that sea levels did indeed rise dramatically at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. Vast areas of land were drowned. Populations were forced to migrate. If humans carried memories of that trauma, it is no wonder they became myths. This raises a possibility. Could the pyramids be linked to such memories? If there was a society before Egypt, one that had knowledge of stone, stars, and cycles, could its achievements have survived in fragments? Fragments later adopted by the pharaohs? Perhaps Khufu and his successors did not begin from nothing. Perhaps they inherited not only the land, but also its monuments, its traditions, its cosmic blueprint. Some researchers have suggested that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx might be remnants of such a civilization. To them, the pharaohs were custodians rather than creators. They claimed ownership as rulers often do, but they did not lay the first stone. Instead, they reused, rebuilt, and expanded structures already ancient in their time. This would explain why Khufu's name appears only in hidden graffiti, not in proud inscriptions. It would explain why the Great Pyramid is unmatched in perfection, as if it came from a different tradition. It would even explain why the Sphinx, weathered by rain, feels older than the desert itself. But who were these supposed builders? Here, evidence fades into speculation. Some point to the green Sahara cultures, like those at Nabta Playa, who built stone circles long before the pyramids. Others look to the Levant, Mesopotamia, or even further afield, imagining networks of knowledge that stretched across continents. The truth may be simpler. Perhaps it was a culture that left little behind, erased by shifting sands, remembered only in stone. It is tempting to leap toward sensational answers. Over the years, writers have claimed that aliens built the pyramids, or that Atlantean magicians raised them by levitation. Such ideas capture the imagination, but they distract from what is most profound. The fact that human beings, long before history as we know it, were capable of astonishing feats. We do not need to invoke extraterrestrials to explain intelligence, creativity, and ambition. Those qualities are our own, written in our bones for tens of thousands of years. Still, the possibility of a forgotten chapter remains. We know that civilizations rise and fall. The Indus Valley cities, once thriving, disappeared into obscurity. The Maya built great pyramids in Central America, only to leave them abandoned in the jungle. The Minoans of Crete flourished, then vanished after earthquakes and eruptions. Why should we assume that Egypt was the very first, rather than one in a long chain of cultures, some lost, some remembered? Imagine for a moment that the Giza Plateau was once home to such a culture. Long before Khufu, long before hieroglyphs, people gathered there. They watched the sun rise over the horizon, the stars wheel overhead. They measured, planned, and built. They left behind structures meant to endure, knowing their time might not. Then climate shifted, rivers dried, and their world ended. Millennia later, the pharaohs came. They found the plateau already marked by stone, already sacred. They added their own monuments, but the oldest works were not truly theirs. If this is true, then the pyramids are not only Egyptian, they are human, belonging to a lineage of builders who stretch back beyond history. They are both tombs and testaments, both dynastic symbols and echoes of a deeper past. Oral traditions may hold fragments of this truth. Plato's Atlantis, the flood myths of Mesopotamia, the drowned lands of folklore. These may be distorted memories of real events. They may point to times when human societies reached heights we underestimate, only to be erased by disaster. The pyramids in this light become more than monuments. They become survivors, stone witnesses to a chapter we no longer remember. Skeptics demand evidence, and rightly so. Without artifacts, texts, or datable remains, such ideas cannot move from theory to fact. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The Sahara has buried much beneath its sands. The Nile has shifted course countless times. The earth itself has a way of erasing what came before. What survives is fragmentary, partial, open to interpretation. In the end, the theory of unknown builders does not need to replace the official story. It does not need to deny the genius of the Egyptians. Instead, it adds another layer, another possibility. Perhaps Khufu was both builder and inheritor. Perhaps the Old Kingdom drew upon knowledge far older, knowledge preserved in myths, encoded in geometry, remembered in fragments of stone. This possibility invites humility. We like to think we know the story of humanity, that history begins where our textbooks begin, but the pyramids remind us that the past is vast, and much of it lies beyond our reach. They remind us that civilizations rise not from nothing, but from layers upon layers of memory, tradition, and inheritance. And they remind us that even the mightiest cultures can be forgotten, leaving only silent stones to speak for them. It is almost impossible to imagine Egypt without the pyramids. They are so deeply woven into its image that when we hear the word Egypt, we see their outlines rising against the desert sky. But let us pause and try just for a moment to picture a world in which those colossal forms were never built. No triangular silhouettes on the Giza plateau, no vast stones fitted with impossible precision, no monuments that became the face of an entire civilization. What would Egypt have been without them? And what would the world itself be missing if the pyramids had never existed? To answer that, we must first consider what the pyramids meant to Egypt itself. They were more than tombs. They were statements of divine order, symbols of eternity, and anchors for religion. The pyramid shape was not chosen at random. To the Egyptians, the sloping sides evoked the rays of the sun. The pharaoh, buried inside, was meant to rise along those rays, ascending to join the gods in the sky. The pyramid was both a grave and a cosmic machine, linking earth and heaven. Without the pyramids, Egyptian religion would have taken a different shape. The great funerary cults that surrounded them might never have formed. Priests would not have gathered daily in their temples, offering bread, beer, and incense to sustain the pharaoh in the afterlife. The solar symbolism might have been weaker, or expressed through smaller shrines and obelisks rather than monumental forms. The idea of the pharaoh as a god on earth, his power reaching beyond death, might have lacked its most visible proof. In their place, Egypt might have leaned more heavily on other traditions. The tombs cut into cliffs at places like Abydos or later Thebes could have become the main burial form from the very beginning. Instead of geometric mountains of stone, Egypt's sacred landscape might have been dominated by carved valleys and hidden chambers. The Valley of the Kings, so central in the New Kingdom, might have had an even longer prehistory, becoming the main symbol of eternity rather than the pyramid. The pharaoh's afterlife might have been imagined not as a journey to the sun, but as a descent into the earth. Without the pyramids, Egypt's image of itself would have been less monumental. The early dynasties might still have built temples and statues, but none would have carried the same sense of permanence. A pyramid is not only large, it feels immovable, eternal, a mountain shaped by human hands. Without that, the pharaohs would have seemed less godlike, their reigns more fragile. Their claims to rule the land forever would have been harder to sustain. The absence would not only reshape Egypt, but also the ancient world beyond. The pyramids became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a list compiled by Greek writers to celebrate humanity's greatest creations. Without them, the list itself would look different. Perhaps the ziggurats of Mesopotamia would have taken their place, or the massive statues of Babylon. But none of those carried the same aura of mystery. None have survived with the same power. The Greeks themselves were deeply impressed by Egypt. Herodotus, traveling in the 5th century BCE, described the pyramids with awe. To him, they were marvels that testified to the ambition and power of the pharaohs. For Greek thinkers, Egypt represented antiquity, wisdom, and stability. They looked to its monuments as evidence of knowledge far older than their own. If the pyramids had not stood on the plateau, the Greeks might have looked elsewhere for inspiration. Perhaps Mesopotamia, with its temples and astronomy, would have carried that role. Perhaps Crete, with its labyrinthine palaces. But Egypt without pyramids would not have carried the same weight in the Greek imagination. And what of Rome? The Romans were fascinated by Egypt. When Augustus conquered the Nile Valley, he used its symbols to bolster his own authority. Obelisks were shipped to Rome and re-erected in its squares. The pyramids inspired Roman tombs, such as the Pyramid of Cestius, which still stands in the city today. Without Giza, that fascination would have been weaker. Egypt would still have been exotic, still a land of gods and temples, but it would not have loomed so large in Rome's self-image. The very idea of borrowing from Egypt would have carried less weight. The impact stretches further still. In later centuries, when travelers and scholars rediscovered the wonders of the ancient world, the pyramids became a bridge to the past. Medieval Arab historians wrote of them with wonder, imagining them as storehouses of secret knowledge. Renaissance thinkers studied them as proof of ancient genius. Explorers, adventurers, and scientists in the modern era were drawn to them, measuring, mapping, and debating their purpose. Without them, much of that fascination would have shifted elsewhere. We might today speak of Mesopotamian ziggurats or Mayan pyramids with the same reverence, but the unique thread of continuity that Egypt provides would be gone. And what of us in the modern world? The absence would be enormous. The pyramids are not just Egypt's heritage, they are humanity's. They are among the most photographed monuments on Earth. Tourists travel from every continent to stand before them, to feel their weight in silence. Without them, Egypt's tourism industry would be profoundly different. The Nile would still attract visitors, as would temples at Luxor and Karnak, but the magnetic pole of Giza would not exist. Millions of journeys would never have been made, millions of imaginations would never have been touched. The pyramids are also symbols. They appear on banknotes, stamps, logos, even on computer icons when we need to represent history. They stand for endurance, mystery, and human ambition. Without them, what image would we use instead? Perhaps Stonehenge, perhaps the Great Wall of China, perhaps the Parthenon. But none of those carry the same universality. The pyramid, simple in shape yet overwhelming in scale, has become the global shorthand for the ancient past. Without it, our shared imagination would be poorer. Architecture, too, would be altered. The pyramid form has inspired countless imitations. From mausoleums to modern glass towers, designers have borrowed its silhouette to evoke permanence and mystery. Without the originals at Giza, those echoes would never have been born. Entire strands of architecture might never have existed. Even beyond buildings, the pyramid has shaped thought itself. Its form, broad at the base and narrow at the top, has become a metaphor for hierarchy, for structure, for progress. We speak of the food pyramid, the pyramid of needs, the pyramid of power. These metaphors are so natural that we rarely question them. But without the actual pyramids, we might never have chosen that shape as our symbol. Our language would be different, and with it, our way of thinking. In the end, to imagine a world without the pyramids is to imagine a world less anchored. They are more than monuments. They are points of orientation. They remind us of time, of endurance, of the scale of human ambition. Without them, the desert would still stretch to the horizon, the Nile would still flood, pharaohs would still rule, but something essential would be missing. Something that ties us to the deep past, that tells us humanity has always reached for eternity. And so, even as we ask whether the Egyptians truly built them, even as we consider alternative stories of their origin, we recognize their role. They are not only Egyptian, not only ancient, they are part of the world's memory, shaping how we see civilization itself. Remove them, and we remove a cornerstone of our imagination. For all their scale, the pyramids and the Sphinx are as much about what we cannot see as what we can. Their outer forms are known to every traveler, every photograph, every textbook. But beneath the stone, under the sands, questions remain. What lies hidden inside? What chambers or passages still wait, sealed in silence, beneath the monuments we think we know? Legends of hidden spaces beneath the Giza Plateau stretch back for centuries. Legends of hidden spaces beneath the Giza Plateau stretch back for centuries. Medieval writers in the Arab world spoke of secret tunnels, treasure vaults, and ancient libraries buried under the pyramids. In their imagination, these structures were not only tombs, but storehouses of knowledge, archives left by earlier peoples, waiting to be unlocked. Such ideas found new life in modern times with the story of the Hall of Records. The Hall of Records is a legendary chamber said to lie beneath the Sphinx. a vault containing the wisdom of a lost civilization. The idea became famous in the early 20th century through the writings of Edgar Cayce, an American mystic who claimed to channel visions of the past. In his trance readings, Cayce spoke of Atlantis and of survivors who fled to Egypt after their homeland was destroyed. According to him, these refugees built the Sphinx as a marker, a guardian above a chamber filled with texts, tools, and secrets of forgotten science. The Hall of Records, he said, would one day be discovered and would change humanity's understanding of its origins. For mainstream scholars, Cayce's visions hold no weight. They are seen as spiritual speculation rather than archaeology. Yet the legend persists, partly because it speaks to a longing we all share. The idea that somewhere, hidden away, there may be a library of truth, a time capsule from an age we have forgotten. In the late 20th century, technology added fuel to this imagination. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys were carried out around the Sphinx and the pyramids. These tools send pulses into the earth, measuring how they reflect from underground structures. The results suggested anomalies, areas where the subsurface behaved differently than expected, as if cavities or voids might be present. One survey, in the 1980s, indicated a rectangular cavity beneath the Sphinx's paws. Another, in the 1990s, suggested there might be tunnels connecting different parts of the plateau. To some, this was evidence that the legends were true, that hidden chambers really do exist, waiting for excavation. But here the story grows complicated. Egyptian authorities responsible for the monuments have often reacted with caution. Official archaeologists acknowledge that cavities may exist, but they argue that not all anomalies are artificial. Natural fissures, erosion channels, or differences in rock density can produce similar readings. Digging into the Sphinx or the pyramids without clear proof would risk damaging structures that have stood for thousands of years. The weight of history presses heavily on each decision. This caution frustrates some researchers. They suspect secrecy or even deliberate suppression of discoveries. Over the years, accusations have circulated that Egypt's antiquities authorities conceal findings that might disrupt the accepted timeline of history. Officials deny this, insisting that their duty is preservation, not speculation. But the very lack of answers feeds the mystery. Each unexcavated anomaly becomes a magnet for imagination. Part of the tension lies in what these monuments represent. The pyramids are not only scientific puzzles, they are national symbols. For Egypt, they embody heritage, identity, and pride. Any claim that they might hold secrets older than the pharaohs challenges not only academic consensus, but cultural ownership. To suggest that the pyramids were inherited rather than built by Egyptians risks diminishing their place in national history. In such a context, even cautious research can be politically sensitive, yet the mystery endures. When we look at the Sphinx, half buried in sand, its body scarred by time, it is hard not to wonder what lies below. Its enclosure has been excavated, its body studied, but no definitive exploration has confirmed or denied the existence of hidden chambers. The same is true of the Great Pyramid. Its known corridors and chambers form only a small fraction of its vast interior. Sealed doors, blocked shafts, and unexplored spaces remain. In 2017, a project called Scan Pyramids used muon tomography, a technique that tracks cosmic particles passing through stone, to peer inside the Great Pyramid. The scans reveal something remarkable, a large, previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery. It is about 30 meters long, comparable in size to the Chamber of the King itself. What purpose it served, or whether it connects to other passages, remains unknown. Some suggest it is a relieving space, designed to reduce pressure on lower chambers. Others see it as a deliberate hidden structure, perhaps even symbolic. The discovery reignited debate. If one great cavity remained hidden until now, how many more might still exist? What makes these mysteries powerful is not only the possibility of discovery, but the way they shape our imagination of the past. When we stand before the pyramids, the sense of awe comes partly from what we see, the stones, the scale, the precision. But just as much, it comes from what we cannot see. The idea that beneath our feet may lie unopened passages, lost chambers, secrets waiting in the dark, adds another layer to their presence. They are monuments, yes, but also questions carved in stone. Mystery has always been part of their power. The Greeks, encountering the pyramids, speculated about their builders. Medieval travelers told stories of hidden treasure. 19th century explorers broke into sealed corridors, only to find emptiness and silence. Each age projects its own hopes and fears into the stone. For some, the pyramids are tombs of kings. For others, they are astronomical observatories. For still others, they are machines of geometry or storehouses of knowledge. The truth may be simpler, but the allure lies in the uncertainty. Archaeology at its best moves slowly and carefully, testing claims against evidence. But human imagination is restless. We are drawn to gaps in the story. We want the hidden chamber, the sealed door, the forgotten library. We want to believe that beneath the stone, answers wait. Whether or not the Hall of Records exists, whether or not the anomalies prove to be chambers, the legends reveal something about us. They show how deeply we long for connection with the past. They show our hunger for wisdom, our hope that the ancients left us a message, a gift to be discovered when we are ready. Perhaps that is why the pyramids and the Sphinx continue to fascinate. They are not only achievements of engineering, they are mirrors for our imagination. Each hidden cavity becomes a symbol of the unknown, each unexplored shaft a reminder that history is never complete. The monuments endure, but their meaning is always unfinished, always waiting. The desert changes when night falls. What by day seems harsh and blinding turns soft under the stars. The sand no longer glares, it glows faintly in the moonlight. The heat that pressed down for hours releases, and the air becomes cool, almost tender. On the horizon where the dunes blur into sky, silence reigns so completely that you can hear your own breath. It is here, in the stillness of the desert night, that the pyramids show a different face. By daylight, they dominate. They are monuments of power, their angles sharp, their shadows long. But at night, they retreat into quiet guardianship. Their outlines merge with the sky, their presence both near and infinite. They are no longer constructions of stone alone, but silhouettes stitched into the fabric of eternity. To stand at Giza after sundown is to feel watched, not by human eyes, but by something older. The pyramids, rising in silence, feel less like achievements of a single culture and more like companions of time itself. Their geometry seems to mirror the constellations, their weight to anchor the stars. They are immovable, and yet they whisper of movement, of cycles of sun and moon, of the precession of the heavens, of the flow of human generations. Who built them and why has been our question, but as the night deepens, that question feels less urgent. Perhaps what matters is not the answer, but the persistence of the riddle. The pyramids embody our search for meaning, our refusal to accept that the world is only what we see. They invite us to look further, to imagine more, to wonder. Think of how long they have stood. When Cleopatra walked these sands, the pyramids were already ancient, older to her than she is to us. When the Greek philosophers speculated about the origins of wisdom, the pyramids were there, mute but present. When Rome ruled the Mediterranean, they stood unchanged, outlasting empire after empire. They have seen conquerors, pilgrims, explorers, and tourists. They have witnessed revolutions and renaissances, yet they themselves remain. This endurance is not only physical, it is symbolic. The pyramids remind us that humanity has always reached beyond itself, that we have always sought permanence in a fleeting world. They are proof that people who lived thousands of years ago felt the same longing we feel, to leave a mark, to be remembered, to connect with something greater than ourselves. Even if we never resolved the debates, whether they were tombs or time capsules, Egyptian or inherited, practical or cosmic, the pyramids serve as a mirror. They reflect not only the desert sky, but also the imagination of every generation. Each age sees in them what it most desires. For some, they are evidence of divine kingship. For others, they are monuments of mathematics. For still others, they are riddles, holding secrets of forgotten civilizations. The truth may be simpler, or it may be deeper than we can guess. Either way, the mystery itself is part of their gift. Mystery can be unsettling, but it can also be comforting. It reminds us that not everything must be solved. Some questions, like the pyramids themselves, endure precisely because they have no final answer. They allow us to dream, to speculate, to weave stories that connect us with the past. In that sense, the pyramids are not only guardians of stone, they are guardians of wonder. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing at their base. The air is cool. The desert stretches endlessly around you. Above, the stars blaze in their ancient patterns, Orion's belt tilted across the sky. The pyramid's shadow reaches outward, merging with the night. You place your hand on the stone, and it is cold, rough, unyielding. And yet, in that touch, you feel a thread stretching backward through time, linking you to all who have stood there before. Farmers from the Nile floodplains, soldiers of Alexander, scholars from Athens, travelers from Rome, pilgrims from Arabia, explorers from Europe, all of them paused at this same spot. All of them looked upward. All of them wondered. You are not alone. The pyramid binds you to a chain of humanity that stretches across millennia. And as you imagine this, you realize, perhaps the pyramids were never meant to give us answers. Perhaps they were meant to give us this feeling, the feeling of standing at the edge of time, of belonging to something vast, of being both small and infinite. The desert night is patient. The stars wheel slowly, the pyramids wait. They are not in a hurry. They know that we will keep returning, generation after generation, with new questions and new hopes. They know that even when civilizations fall, people will find their way back to this plateau, drawn by a silence more eloquent than words. So we leave them here, as we found them, silent, immovable, radiant in their mystery. We leave them to watch over the desert, to measure the passing of time, to remind us that some riddles are eternal, and in their presence we find a strange peace. For if they can endure, perhaps we can too. If they can hold their mystery for thousands of years, perhaps it is enough that we hold our wonder for tonight. The sands are quiet, the air cools, the pyramids stand as they always have, as they always will. Their riddle is not only about who built them or why, it is about us, our need to question, our hunger for meaning, our gift for dreaming. And with that thought, let the weight of history rest gently. Let the silence of the desert soothe you. Let the pyramids, those timeless watchers, keep their vigil while you drift into your own eternity of sleep.